Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm Rachel Astarte. Today, my guest is Dr. Roseann Capanna-Hodge. She is a mental health trailblazer, founder of the Global Institute of Children's Mental Health and Dr. Roseann Capanna-Hodge LLC, which is devoted to changing the way we view and treat children's mental health. Wow, we need to talk about this. So thank you for being here.
I'm so excited for this conversation.
Yeah. So just to give us a little background, how did you get into this field?
Yeah, so actually, it truly was my calling. And when I was 5 years old, I have a very vivid memory, Rachel. And so when I was 5 years old, my mom's friend Angela asked me what I wanted to be, and what came out of my mouth was I wanted to be a psychiatrist.
Wow.
And I I had no exposure to a psychiatrist. And what it was, or even my family was entrepreneurs, immigrants from Italy. So, there was no exposure to even mental health at that point in the 70s. And so that's why I always say it was my calling. When, as time went on, I realized that psychiatrists are really sort of only do medications, and that wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to help people through guidance, through the talk process, and different types of psychotherapy without medications. I've always only been holistic. And then in this 30 years, right? So this is my 30th year of mental health. I've worked in a lot of capacities, psychiatric hospitals, schools, with addicts, with kids, with adults, you name it. And I really, really specialize in working with kids, teens, and young adults and their families. That's really where my heart is. Mental health is really at a crisis pre-pandemic, certainly during the pandemic, and people are out of hope and belief. And I really specialize in showing families that, wow, there's so many evidence-based approaches to reducing and reversing mental health symptoms. And that's my mission. That's what I'm doing. That's why I'm on TV all the time. My media has reached well over 2 billion people. And I have books, I have all these things, and I just want people to know it's going to be okay, which is the title of my book, because we need hope.
Yeah. And we're going to talk more about your book in a minute.
Yeah.
And you touched on some beautiful topics that we were also going to talk about because they're so important. Why are kids so unfocused and unmotivated right now?
Yeah. Right now, I don't think there's a kid or an adult who isn't feeling the effects of, how many months are we in this pandemic? And right, well over a year. So the isolation, all of these Zoom meetings, all of this sitting, all of this disjointed education, in and out, hybrid, in person. Maybe I have friends whose kids have never been back to school yet in California, and they're going back next month. So this lack of structure, lack of routine, parents at a level of stress. 70% of parents, according to the APA Stress in America survey, are experiencing significant stress due to pandemic parenting. No surprise. And so everybody is really feeling incredibly unfocused, really struggling with motivation, especially for kids and teens and college kids. College kids, we're not really talking about these college kids, but our teens and young adults, in terms of anxiety and depression, are really being hit right now. So anxiety and depression, these clinical issues impact your focus in the same way that clinical ADHD is. We're seeing such a rise in that, but it's really just the long-term impact of, isolation, disjointed education, and stress that is really impacting people's attention and motivation.
Yeah, you touched on something that I would love to just tease apart a little bit. When we think about Erickson's life cycle stages, right? There's a difference between an 8-year-old and a 16-year-old, because teenagers need to be around other teenagers. It's what
they need to differentiate. They need to have autonomy. And this is their developmental period for them to try that hat on with guidance and love from the people around them, including teachers and parents. And they're just not getting that. It's the first time that they, they can do things on their own, and they're not able to.
Yeah, that's a really important point. And I want to make it very clear here because I like to cover all the bases. When I say teens need to be around other teens, not everybody is the same. I know
Right.
and I found it very interesting, and I don't know if you came across this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Not even every child is suffering during the pandemic. Some children
Nope.
are thriving in the isolation because they're not distracted. And I'm thinking of my own son who really just blossomed during the pandemic, and he's a very social kid. But he said, oh gosh, it's lovely. I don't have think there's not loudness around me and I can focus on what I need to focus on. Do you experience that as well?
Yeah, so there is a small subset of kids that, in my experience with both in my practice and then just talking to so many, groups and, just being all over the place and that are actually thriving.
Mhm.
And some of those reasons are having extra time to sleep in,
Mhm.
right? Um, Hot lunches,
Right, right, at home.
being able to control the way they're doing their schoolwork,
Right.
right? Less distractions, and they're not in social drama,
Mhm.
right? So they're able to be more selective with who they're hanging out with.
Correct, yeah.
And for sure, there's definitely a group. And my kids I've worked with a lot of kids who have mental health issues due to infectious disease.
Mm.
So I have kids with PANS and PANDAS, where it's a sudden onset of a psychiatric problem due to toxins or infectious disease.
Mhm.
And then I work with people who just, have Lyme disease or other chronic celiac, whatever's going on.
Wow.
They're loving life
Yeah,
because there's no pressure for them to go back to school because they can do a hybrid option
right.
and function well. And I think kids that are doing well in that way too, Rachel, they're getting decent virtual education. So the
Mhm.
delivery of the education is pretty good. It's not a 1 hour a week, a day Google Meet. Like they're
Right,
getting
right.
quality education. I
Mhm.
think that's really important too.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And so I don't want us to be talking about this
No,
blanket statement. I just wanted to have that. There is that little
yeah,
subset. And even learning time management, I think, is also
definitely.
important too, because
Yeah.
these are
And
things that
some,
you wouldn't learn in a school because it's all
no,
done
and
for you.
they have to do it. And so true. And some families are loving this so much. You might be listening and saying, I don't know who they are, but there are some families that are loving this so much, they're actually full on homeschooling their kids, like
Yes.
indefinitely.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
so it's opened their eyes to the quality of education that their kids are
Yeah.
getting,
Yeah.
maybe the lack of quality of education.
Well, yeah. Yeah.
So I think people are, I know people that are actually sold their home and went into a RV and traveling all over the place,
Beautiful.
providing education.
And
Oh
that's
yeah,
supplemental education in a real time. That's like unschooling in a
absolutely.
way. Yeah.
Unschooling, 100%. And,
Yeah.
unschooling is that you're taking it day by day. There's all different types of homeschoolers. I'm actually,
Sure.
I'm a homeschooler of one of my kids. My other kid goes to a small private school that's very, it's a democratic process school. So it actually teaches you to think on your own and
Beautiful.
be independent. And the Hodges, we raise kids who know how to say no.
Nice.
And they are very autonomous. And and I clearly don't believe one size education fits all. I mean,
Right.
we
Absolutely.
have to do that. So it's
Yeah.
pretty interesting. And some parents are like, I will never homeschool ever again. This is so hard. It is
Yeah.
hard,
It is. It
hard.
is. It is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
So getting back to the kids that are having more trouble being at home and need the school,
Yeah.
what would you say is the long-term effects of the pandemic on these kids?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing survey research from both United States, Asia, and Europe that's all pointing to the same thing. There are long-term effects. We're
Mhm.
seeing a definite uptick in clinical anxiety,
Mm.
depression. We're seeing one startling statistic out of the US is showing that when a teen or a young adult has a family member with COVID, they have the 50% chance of moderate to severe depression.
Wow.
So there's a lot of stress. There's a lot to unpack there around having COVID, maybe physically actually being sick, right? Fear of it, just total social rejection from people. I mean, when you have COVID, people are scared of you for quite a bit.
Right.
So there's a lot of factors there, and the long-term impact, right? So we have to look at other situations, whether it's trauma situations that have affected an entire community. And I was one of the approved providers in Sandy Hook when that happened, in that tragedy. And so, there's a lot of information about 9/11, what happened, what kind of things helped, what were the long-term impact. And so we have some ideas about what are protective factors in mental health and what are risk factors, right? So risk factors, if you're already highly stressed, you already have a clinical issue. And I'm going to tell you one of the biggest risk factors for kids in mental health in general is if you have a parent with a significant mental health issue and they are not taking care of themselves. So you can have anxiety and depression, and you can be showing your kids your resilience and your grit and your coping skills. Okay. Nobody is perfect, right? But you need to show your kids how to manage difficult situations.
Absolutely.
What are problems to it? This is what kids are missing. So we know more resilient kids have coping skills, right? So when we look at this long-term impact, what are protective factors? Well, having coping skills, having problem-solving skills, having autonomy, right? So when you parent your kids in an autonomy supportive way, there's actually a style of parenting, which I'm a huge proponent of, and I talk a lot about in my book, It's Going to Be Okay. It's called autonomy supportive parenting. And it's a mix of authoritative parenting, positive parenting, but it's really putting bumpers, creating safe spaces, a lot of love, a lot of communication, and letting your kid make some failures.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And Mike, I believe in teaching kids how to cook. I think kids cooking as early as you can get them cooking, like literally my kids were cooking before they could walk. It gives them power, it gives them control, and a sense of control really builds self-esteem. But here's a great example of letting your kid fail. So my younger kid, Giancarlo, loves really spicy food. I'm talking spicy food. Okay. And I like spicy food. His taste bud for spice is even stronger than mine at 10 years old. And so he was making a soup, and he's putting his jalapeno in there, and then this pepper, that pepper, this pepper, that pepper, and he was like, I'm gonna put red pepper in here too. And I was like, here's the deal, Giancarlo. Did you taste this? And he was like, no. So I was like, what do you think? If this is too spicy, what could you do? And he was like, I could always add more water. I was like, go for it. Now, I thought that thing was way too spicy. He had it and he was like, that was way too spicy. And I was like, that's okay. You figured it out. I didn't tell him that's going to be too spicy.
Right.
Your mouth. And that's so important. It's those little parenting moments that get our kids to feel more comfortable in making decisions for themselves, because we're training them, and you want your kids to make decisions in big situations, when they're offered drugs, or they want to drive over 100 miles an hour, whatever it is, they're going to know and have the internal resources. And it's never too late to work on that, but it becomes a clinical issue when your kid is older. You're going to need therapist help. You're going to need things if your kid is like very impulsive, making decisions that I call Homer Simpson decisions, where you're making a decision and you're like, doy, So we want to really create that and give them space for failures. Space for failures in our American culture is not acceptable.
Exactly right. And I think to normalize that it isn't even failure, it's things didn't go the way that you had planned, and that means you learned. And
Practice.
No one ever, I can't think of any brilliant human being who has never made a mistake. Mistakes help us to learn and compound our education in whatever it is we're trying to do. So
absolutely.
And so to normalize that for children is such a beautiful idea.
Right.
So I want to talk just a little bit, if or not, maybe not just a little bit, but let's try. This is a big, because it's a big subject that touches me very deeply. Natural therapies for mental health
Yeah.
symptoms. So tell me about how you incorporate those, because you started out by talking about it, and I think it's very
Yeah.
important.
So for 30 years, I have been teaching people about natural therapies. Okay. Unfortunately, these are called alternative. These should be called, as I call them, proven methods to reduce and reverse mental health, which is the subtitle of my book. It's going to be okay. I am so sorry. I thought I had that on. You can edit that out.
No, because that's life. That was a mistake, and we're learning from it.
We're learning from it. I'm so sorry. Anyway,
that's all right. Go ahead.
Should always rule number one of podcasting: turn your ringer off. So anyway, my work in my book, It's Going to Be Okay, is all about proven ways to reduce and reverse mental health. And what's surprising to people, and I break things down, I talk about the 8 pillars of mental health. And yes, this is really a book for parents to help their kids, because I feel that our kids are the canary in the coal mine, and we have to band together. Like, I truly am on a mission to change the way we view and treat children's mental health, and it's so important. But the 8 pillars are applicable to anybody of any age. And what are some of these things? So this is surprising to people. They're not getting the message that diet, sleep, proper detoxification, nutrient deficiencies, genetic mutations, these are all things that are highly impactful on mental health.
Absolutely.
And instead of saying, oh, I have a genetic mutation, MTHFR, that impacts how I utilize the B vitamins, oh, it's genetics, I'm done. No, I want you to think differently and flip that dialogue. Oh, well, what can I do about it? Well, that's what I do. I teach people this. I lay it out.
It's more empowerment. Yeah.
More empowerment. And there's so many things that we can do. I mean, I really emphasize parenting. Not that you're a bad parent, is that we are parenting in a way that maybe our kids are not responding to. And I'm no different. I have 2 special needs kids, and one kid, is put on this earth to humble me, and I have to think on my feet, and I have to be very cautious in how I approach him. And he needs a lot of emphasis and practice with coping skills. Mm-hmm. Where my other kid, I call an easy to parent kid. He, most of the time, you tell him one time and he gets it. Okay. Yeah. That just came out that way, people. Okay. But he's got a very regulated nervous system. He's usually super happy. He literally barely walks. He skips. He's always humming. He's just that way. Mm-hmm. And I also spent a lot of time talking about clinical therapies, right? So when you have a clinical issue, there's way more that you can do besides a psychiatric medication. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to kids, about 70% of the time, kids are given a psychiatric medication that is off-label, meaning it is not, there's no clinical evidence to utilize this. So what are alternatives? Well, I am a huge fan of neurofeedback and biofeedback. I work with people in my center, but I also work with people all over the world remotely doing neurofeedback, because we have equipment that we can send people. And, what does it do? It regulates the nervous system. And once you're in a stress state, which is a sympathetic dominant state, when we should be in a parasympathetic state, once you're living in that sympathetic dominant state, you are not processing information. You are not processing language the same way. And so when you try to do talk therapy, you literally waste your time when you're in a stress hyperactivated state. Right. So we have to, my magic juju is what whole basis of this work is regulate your nervous system. Yes, I love biofeedback and neurofeedback, but I'm a huge fan of meditation. I'm a huge fan of breath work. I'm a huge fan of yoga. There's a long list of things that are evidence-based. Okay.
Yes.
Now, I believe if my client says to me, I'm doing this and I'm working with a remote healer and it's helping me, I say, awesome, do it. You believe it works? Wonderful. But when it comes to the work that I do, I really focus on evidence-based approaches, because I'm pushing up against pharma. And the belief that people feel about mental health is who's on top of the triangle is a physician, when you should be on the top of your triangle and making these choices for yourself. And that's what this is about. So I regulate the nervous system. Then I believe in teaching and coming in with very specific types of psychotherapy.
Beautiful.
And that has been something that has helped thousands of people that I work with.
That's
so and people just aren't getting this message, and they're finding me when they're broken down and they're in extreme distress, which is okay. It's always the right time. But I want to change that. I want to prevent this from happening.
Say more preventive work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. So I could talk about this all day. And the mind, body, spirit connection is my jam. And that's what we always talk about. But tell us how we can get your book and how to reach you.
Yeah. Well, you can go to It's Gonna, GONNABOK.com. And when you pre-order the book, it's all there for you. I have 4 amazing freemiums for you, including videos and downloads. But you can buy my book. It's going to be okay on Amazon. It's on pre-order right at the time of this, but it will be released May 11th. Okay. And you can find me everywhere on social, from TikTok to YouTube to Instagram, as Dr. Roseann, DrRoseann, no E at the end.
Okay. And I'm going to put all of the links in the show notes so that people will be able to find them. So that won't be a problem. And of course, when we share this on social media, they'll be there as well. Great. Wow. So much, I could talk all day, but I appreciate you coming on Self Talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. And, I ask everybody, if you know or care about somebody whose child is suffering, tell 5 friends about this book, because this book is designed to change people's lives. And I spent so many years helping people who are in such a pain point. And I just want everybody to know there's hope for healing.
Beautiful. Thanks so much, Dr. Roseann. Thank you.